What's up, everybody? You are watching the Bar Bites podcast, the podcast for law students looking to life hack their legal careers and learn from the best and brightest in their fields to find out how they got to where they are today. I'm your host, Michael Goldfaden, founder of the plaintiff's personal injury firm Goldfaden Law, which is a newly formed partnership, the partnership of Goldfaden Benson. Today, I'm here with the man behind that partnership, Matt Benson. He's here today to talk to us a little bit about his background as a Navy JAG officer. He's also an accomplished film producer, novelist. He's got one of the most eclectic backgrounds you'll ever hear out of an attorney. Let's give a warm Bar Bites welcome to Matt Benson. Matt, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Right on, man. I'm excited. I usually have a bunch of guests on that I don't know. This one's going to try to be a little bit different, right? Because you and I are obviously very good friends. Our wives are really good friends. We have formed a partnership that we're both really excited about. So tell us first, just what was it about my law firm, Goldfaden Law, that drew you in either to the personal injury space or me or just in general, and tell us a little bit about how this partnership formed.
Yeah, I mean, not to blow smoke too much, I don't want to
No, say really
stroke
good
their
things.
ego too much
really
here
good
to
things
start
about
out the podcast. But yeah, I think, as I'm transitioning out of, being in the military for now like 11 years, I did 5 years active duty, and then I just took reserve sets of orders. So, it ended up adding up to about 11 years. And in making that transition and looking at all my options, I've seen in the past 6 years, you grow your firm and the success that you've had. And, I think there's a range of opportunities, even though, obviously I'm barred in California and I'm a Navy attorney. The logical thing would be to practice law. But there's a lot of different things I think that all service members consider when they leave the military, because it's not always a seamless, easy transition. So like you said in the intro, I think being good friends and watching the way that you run your practice, the way that you treat clients, the professionalism that you have, the network that you've built, and the success that you've had, was why I begged you to, please employ me. So yeah, that's I think was the primary motivation to, wanting to join up with you. And then I think, the area of personal injury law just allows for a lot of client contact where, if you're at a big law firm, and I'm sure you've had other guests on the pod, and I'm sure a lot of, the law students listening know this, if you're at a big law firm, you're barely ever talking to your client, and sometimes not at all.
Right.
So yeah, that I think answers the question. It was a lot of different factors, but I think those are the two biggest.
For sure. And I've got a ton of good stuff to say about you too, but we're not going to get there yet. more good stuff about me first. No, I think one of the questions that our audience members will probably have is, this personal injury space, obviously a lot different than the background that you bring to the table coming from the United States Navy, right? Being a service member, being an attorney for the Navy. What are the similarities that you see, or what are the skills that you've acquired as a Navy JAG officer that you think will translate well in Goldfaden Benson?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting question because as a Navy JAG, and without getting way too into the weeds on what we do.
We got no time limit here.
There's a lot of different practice areas when you practice in the military. You can be in command services, which is basically like, it's also called staff judge advocate. You're basically the general counsel to a commanding officer, whether it's a Navy installation or a ship or a military unit. And then there's prosecution and defense, which is criminal justice. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is what we have in the military that governs all service members that, raise their right hand and take the oath. And then, the last area of practice is legal assistance. And that's when you get to sit across from a service member or a spouse. They're both entitled to legal assistance services, and help them with a legal issue they're having. It could be a landlord-tenant case. It could be, helping them out navigating a divorce. It could be helping them with a credit issue, their finances. Mm-hmm. It's a broad range of issues. And I think in all my, time in service of all the 11 years, I did mostly command services and legal assistance. And, there is a melding of, I think, those two areas of practice because one, you're not advocating, but you're advising on behalf of the highest ranking person in the command. And then the other one, it's, could be an 18-year-old who, is just got out of boot camp and is at their first duty station. It's their first time away from home, and they have a legal issue that they need help with that is distracting them from their duties. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I think being able to interact with a client, whether it's the highest ranking person in the, entire military unit or the 18-year-old that's fresh out of boot camp, that's what not only I did the most, it's what I enjoyed the most. Mm-hmm. So I think, taking those elements of, the practice that I've had for 11 years in the military, it's directly applicable. And the thing I most enjoy about personal injury law, which is that, it's consumer law. You get to sit across from an individual and advocate on their behalf, help them navigate through a difficult legal scenario. So that definitely is what I'm most excited about, finding an area of practice that I'm not only well suited to do, but that I'm going to enjoy.
Yeah, that's cool. And obviously that speaks to what we do, right? Because every client that comes into the door who's injured, everyone gets injured. So you can be a CEO at a company. You might have a serious injury case that you need help with. You can be just a random homeless person walking across the road getting hit by a car. And so there's obviously that huge disparity. I guess my question to you is, do the legal issues that you were helping these people out with for the military, was it all under the military code and its own unique set of laws, or were there also things that they would have to deal with that they had legal issues that they would be able to come to you with that were just like civilian legal issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a combination of both. We have like the Joint Ethics Regulation, which is our governing body for ethics. We have the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and commanding officers would hold the power to decide how to dispose of criminal misconduct when a member of their command, did something that potentially violated the UCMJ. So that was military specific. But then there's, this Joint Ethics Regulation, also military specific. But then you have a lot of civilian laws, depending on what state you were in, So, obviously I'm barred in California, but I was stationed in, I've been to Newport, Rhode Island, I've been to Florida, and, then kind of finished the last half of my career in California. And there were a lot of state-specific laws that would come up, whether it's, consumer protection laws. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a federal organization that monitors and makes sure that consumers are protected. But there would be landlord-tenant laws. There would be divorce law. Those areas would obviously be at the state level. So, when I was in Florida, we would do, when we provide legal assistance services, we do it on what's called a personal representation basis. So we aren't actually signing up the client, but they come in for legal advice, right? Which is the Navy's way of allowing attorneys to advise on areas of law that they're not barred in, because we're not actually signing up the client.
Gotcha.
That's a little bit, inside baseball. Our attorneys in the audience are going to appreciate that, but the non-attorneys might not.
Navy's bending the rules.
Yeah.
I love that. Right?
Yeah. So I would learn a little bit of Florida law, but I've been in California now for, since 2015.
Yeah, and I imagine the principle is kind of the same, right? It's like if there's a new type of case or a new area of the law that you haven't practiced yet, you have to do some research on it and kind of associate with the people that know about it before you can properly advise your clients. And it's pretty similar in the personal injury context, right? Like no two injuries, not even two rear end car collisions are the same because you have different sets of injuries every time. So I imagine that translates really well to the personal injury space also.
100%. Yeah, I think, law students probably have already identified this, or they're learning it, or they're really going to see it when they get out there and start practicing. But that's exactly right. The practice of law is just taking the law, which you got to look up, pretty much 10 times out of 10, and applying it to the unique factual scenario that you're encountering. So, You're absolutely right. I mean, the law that you look up depends on the facts, and how you apply the law depends on the facts. So that's exactly right.
Cool. Um, I know that the Navy kind of plays things close to the vest. Do you have any? Are you allowed to talk about any cases that you've worked on in the Navy? Because you've had some pretty cool ones that, like,
Yeah.
I obviously know about that you were working on a couple summers ago. So, how much can you speak to that, and can you tell our audience members at all about some of the higher profile stuff that you've worked on?
Yeah, and it's kind of unfortunate. It's not the greatest example because not everyone came out of it looking that great. But I can speak about it because it was in the New York Times, and there was an Apple TV Plus show about it. But and this might get
This
a
is
little.
actually a behind the scenes look.
Yeah, this is
at
behind
that.
the scenes for
For the documentary that's coming out.
That's right. That's right. It was Eddie Gallagher was a Navy SEAL that was alleged to have killed a terrorist violating the law of armed conflict behind enemy lines. Well, basically, they took the terrorist back behind the wire, they say, so on the base soil, and killed him instead of
Took him back onto
took
US
him back onto
soil.
U.S.
Okay.
Yeah, not U.S. soil, but back to the base.
Gotcha.
And then was alleged to have killed that guy. And I was the JAG who was advising one of the witnesses' commanding officers. So
one of the witnesses'
Yeah.
commanding officers.
So there was a witness in the trial that got up on the witness stand and said, SOC Gallagher did not kill that terrorist. I did.
Right.
So he got up on the witness stand and basically confessed to murder.
Right. This is
And
all coming out.
I was the JAG who was advising his commanding officer. And
Why
so,
would his commanding officer need to be advised?
and that's a great question. And that's because the jurisdiction to make a military justice decision rests with the commanding officer of the sailor under his or her command.
Oh.
So when the question came up whether to subsequently prosecute this other witness, I was kind of intimately involved in that decision-making process.
Gotcha. And did that witness, if you're allowed to talk about this, was the whole idea behind him confessing, like he was taking one for the team, like for this guy? Or
I don't know his motivations, but I mean, it's public knowledge that he was not subsequently prosecuted.
Right.
But but yeah, that was a tough scenario because the Navy SEAL community didn't come out of that looking that great, and neither did the JAG Corps because I think the prosecutors on that case, I think, were able to convict SOC Gallagher of like taking a picture. It was a novel specification under the Uniform Code of Military Justice where he was not allowed to take a picture with his SEAL teammates and the dead body of the terrorist.
Right.
Was essentially what the charge was.
And then didn't Trump throw all of that out?
And then President Trump said, "Nope,
Right.
He said, nope, I pardon you of being convicted of that offense."
Yeah, that was pretty cool that you got to be involved in all that, because obviously I remember when that was in the news. Can you talk briefly about like how you accept orders, doing what you did for the Navy, and how that works? And because I think like what you did was a little bit different than what a lot of fully enlisted soldiers do, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I was unique in that, I got out in 2017 with the intention of, doing other things and, following a different path and kind of exploring opportunities at that time. And, when I got out in 2017, I actually ended up going to film school here at San Diego State, not USD, but San Diego State, and met my wife.
We'll edit that part.
Yeah, we'll edit that out. We'll cut that. And then I met my wife, like
USD's keeping the lights on.
Yeah,
here, so.
USD, yeah, is providing the mics and the lights and the camera here. So, so I met my wife like right when I started school, and that kind of precipitated like, all right, I gotta keep the money coming in and keep the food on the table. So I ended up taking, sets of reserve as a reservist, which basically just means you're kind of like part-time. You're doing one weekend a month, two weeks a year is kind of the standard that they require reservists to do. I ended up taking active duty orders from 2017, 2018, all the way until now, right before, we partnered up. So that allowed me to stay in San Diego, which was really nice. And it allowed me to do some interesting things like work at, Naval Special Warfare Center, Naval Special Warfare Command. And then I've been with Navy Recruiting Command ever since.
And were you selected for that role in particular, or was that just kind of like, this is what we need right now, and you happen to like fill that role?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yes, I was selected, and that you have to apply for those positions, and you're kind of vetted, because if they're going to bring someone from the reserves on active duty, they can be selective. And so I was both selected, but I also, kind of raised my hand for that because it allowed me to, continue practicing law in the Navy, and, do a lot of other interesting things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really want to get to why I think this partnership's going to work so well, and so many of the processes that I see that you have brought from the Navy just into your everyday life, right? Like, Matt and I obviously know each other, so like I know his wife Elise and his two kids, and just even when you guys first had banks, like watching you write out this sleep schedule and eating schedule and everything, I'm like, this guy he's organized in a way that I'm not. And so I think the partnership works so well for so many of the things that I just think that you're going to bring to the table, and I want to get there. But before I do, I've had former students of mine ask me to write them recommendation letters sometimes because they wanted to go and become Navy JAG officers, or is it the same thing?
In the other services?
Yeah, any
like
other services.
Air Force JAG,
exactly,
or Marine
exactly.
JAG, yeah.
So if any of our students are watching right now and they kind of want to go down that path, right? They're all in law school. Obviously, the military has a big presence down here. How do you walk that line? How do you begin that journey, and how did you begin that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of two ways to answer that question, right? I mean, how did I begin that journey? I was, in law school at UCLA. It was 2012. I was in my, second year of law school. It was 2011. I was in my second year of law school, and I had a cousin who was a Navy SEAL, and he was on a Chinook helicopter and was shot down and killed in action.
That was the largest loss of SEAL life at the time,
yes,
right?
it was the largest loss of special warfare life to date, I believe. Still,
That's crazy that your
yeah.
cousin was on that, because I remember that too.
Yeah, it was really sad. I mean, it was kind of like, here I am in law school in sunny Los Angeles, bopping around with my books, and working hard in law school. But, I had this cousin who, paid the ultimate sacrifice. And that, I think, really kind of reframed, what I wanted to be as a professional, how I wanted to spend my time post law school. And, it was the kind of opportunity that came on my radar because of that event. But the more I looked into the job, the more appealing it became. So that's the first part of the question, right?
Yeah.
I think that the second part of the question is, how would a law student now go about getting involved in any of the uniformed services? And I think that the unique thing about serving as a military attorney is you're part of the Department of Defense, which is an enormous bureaucracy, right? You are going to have to be prepared to, follow directions and take orders from those senior in rank to you. And because it's a big bureaucracy, the needs of each individual service, them being their own, large bureaucracy, change so dramatically with economic conditions and the needs of that service at the time, policy that comes down from the Secretary of Defense. And so I'm saying all that because, I think I can't believe and don't know how I got in the Navy JAG Corps because it was very, very competitive when I got in.
Right.
And so I'm trying to just, illustrate to the students or to help the students, kind of see that the number one thing that I hear across all services that is sort of the determining factor that is always pushes them over the edge to get them to that job, if that's where they want to be, is persistence. You got to just apply. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is obviously it shows that you're persistent and it shows that you really want to be there.
Right.
But then number two is the other piece that I was just getting into. The economic conditions can change and they can change year to year. And, the manning needs of each different service are such that if you get rejected, don't take it personally.
Sure.
Kind of where I'm getting at with that.
Did you have to apply multiple times? Like, was it one of those things?
I must have, tricked them in the interview
No,
somehow
you're like,
because
no.
I was one and done. I was
Yeah.
one and in. So, and I, when Derek, my cousin, was shot down in that helicopter, that was pretty late in my law school career, or it was at least a little bit late to be applying, to the JAG Corps at that stage. So I got it on the first try, and when I got the offer, again, like I said, the more I looked at it, the more I was like, this is a pretty cool job,
So talk to us a little bit more about that, right? Like you say, you find out you're bopping around sunny California with your books, you're in law school, you find out that your cousin is shot down in that helicopter. So how did it change the way that you wanted to spend your time and live your life and your career ultimately?
Yeah, I think just to focus on service, is really the short answer, right? I think when you decide or try to figure out how you're going to use your law degree when you're approaching graduation, the law is such an interesting area to be in because you could go work for Latham and Watkins and, you're working hard and you're a kind of cog in the machine.
I thought you were going to say hate your life.
And you're going to hate your life most of
Just
the time.
Just kidding, guys. Keep going for that job. You're
That's
gonna be
not
fine.
always true, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely have friends that love working their big law jobs. And I mean, my hat's off to them, It's like that is a grind and it's tough. And you've got partners feeding you work because they are, they're trying to bill as many hours as they can through you. So, I've heard horror stories of people getting assignments on Friday evening just so associates can bill the hours over the weekend to pad the partner's pockets. And I think, anyway, not to get too far down that rabbit hole, the point is that, you can go to that big law firm position. You can go to the public defender's office. You can go work at a legal aid, clinic or a nonprofit. You can go into academia.
Right.
I have my very close friend from law school is a professor now. I mean, I've watched my law school classmates just do a whole range of different interesting careers. And so, to answer the question, I think obviously Derek's death, really kind of put front and center that opportunity, given that, he was part of the, he was in the Navy and he was posthumously promoted to a chief, but he was a first class in the Navy, a SEAL, went through gruesome, rigorous training and then, did a bunch of very interesting missions, most of which I didn't really hear about because I, didn't have a right or need to know. And so, when he passed away, that really put front and center to me that option. And, to answer the question, it made me think more about service to others and service to country. And I think, being in the JAG Corps for the last 11 years certainly accomplished that and was a great experience.
So what is it about the job that you say was very attractive to you when you were first looking at it? Because you were like, the more that you looked into it, the better it looked. And it kind of the more it drew you in. So like,
Yeah.
what was it? Was it the
Yeah.
benefits? Was it, obviously you've talked about service and stuff like
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
how about like the day-to-day stuff with the job?
Yeah, it was a couple things. It was benefits. It's good benefits, I mean, it's travel, the opportunity to travel and be in different places and see new places, and the amount of responsibility and experience that you get right off the bat when you're a Navy JAG is, I think vastly different than, the big law example that we just talked about. So it was kind of the total package, I think.
Yeah. And you kind of come from, I guess you were coming from a background where it was like more Matt focused, right? Like you're coming from a background where you were playing basketball
Oh,
in
I'm the
college.
youngest child. It's always been Matt focused. My whole life has been Matt focused.
Well, I'm trying to get to your background and kind of career as a basketball player too, because it's super interesting.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I've lived a very charmed life, I would say.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background as a basketball player, because I actually think that sports play a huge role in your life and how you are in business. And so talk to us a little bit about your basketball career, because I think it's super interesting.
Yeah. I know it's one of those things, I think, right? Like everyone I talk to, whether it's at a cocktail party or people that I meet for the first time, think it's really interesting. And I because I've lived it, and it's my story, I always kind of like, ho hum, and I kind of shrug it off.
Well, you're on a podcast talking about yourself right now, so you got
so let's go. The lights are on. Let's go. So so I was a college basketball player. I probably punched way above my weight, in terms of my athletic ability in relationship to how far I was able to take my career. So if you go way back, I'm from Chico up in Northern California, and I was so laser focused and determined to play Division I college basketball. Like I was not going to take no for an answer. And I played a year of prep school. I played junior college for a year, and then I finally got a scholarship to UC Riverside, and I played there for 2 years. And I got injured. On the second year I was there, I sat out. I had an ankle injury, and one of our assistants got the head job down here in San Diego at Point Loma Nazarene, and so that's how I kind of ended up in San Diego. I ended up having kind of San Diego feeling like home. And I was an All-American at Point Loma, and I was a captain of the team both years. And then, after the season was over, I just had an agent approach me and say, hey, I followed your career. There's a team in Germany that would really love to have you come play for them. And I had actually just had, I think, the 4th surgery. I've had 2 surgeries on each of my ankles. Yeah. So it's kind of a miracle I even was able to walk in here for the podcast today. And so I was like in a walking boot with crutches, and I was like, is this like serious or is this a joke? And so I ended up playing a year professional in, it was a small town, but it was outside of a larger city, Augsburg, Germany, and Bavaria. It was a beautiful region. And I was initially going to do it for 2 years. I did it for 1, and I was like, all right, I gotta like kind of think about what's next. So that is what led me to law school. But I do think, to your point, I think that informs a lot of like who I am and how I work in general. Because I do just I get so laser focused. I was just head down, so determined. And it's like the momentum of being that determined just like carried me from one thing to the next. And then I ended up, being able to play professionally in Germany for a year. So that was a great experience. That was really fun.
I see it in a lot of trial attorneys, right? So we had Dave Fox on the podcast a couple years ago. He was a goalie for soccer in college. We had Robert Hamparian. He's like a black belt in jiu-jitsu and a good athlete. And like, I just hear from so many different trial attorneys about their background in maybe, not necessarily sports, but like something where the focus and the attention is on you. And I think it translates really well to being in a pressure situation where you're like up in front of a judge and a jury, and it kind of draws the same types of people in.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
So like, I don't know, you played shooting guard in college and in Germany, right? And then you were the captain of your team too. I'm sure that translates well in that same sort of vein.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think it's the discipline. I think it's the, there's something about the rush or the adrenaline. There's a little bit of uncertainty that goes in with every game that you play, or time that you step on the field or court, or whatever sport you're playing. And I do think that translates to what we do, right? And I mean, obviously, it's as personal injury, employment, consumer law attorneys, we have to inform our client of the risk, but there is a risk, right? In cases that we take, or strategies that we pursue, there is always an uncertainty when you put a case before a jury, right? And that's just inevitable, and everybody knows that, and we tell our clients that so they completely understand that it's not just like the movies, and it's always going to be a slam dunk when you walk in the courtroom. And I think you're right. I think there's a big parallel between, people that played team sports or individual sports, maybe team sports more so, but
those bowlers too. Dude.
Those bowlers.
I'll tell you what.
I mean,
you haven't felt pressure.
Let's get into that. A lot of people, you've been doing
we're
this.
Gonna skip right over
You've
that.
been doing this podcast for a long time. I think you need to.
About my bowling
I think you need to tell the people what an amazing bowler you are.
I would love to, except I don't think that the same features of athleticism really translate well when you play a sport where you can actually bowl with your right arm and eat a hot dog with your left at the exact same time, which some people were known to do on my high school bowling team. I'll tell you what, though, there are not a lot of jobs like ours where there's a clear winner and loser to trials, right? Like you can go into a trial and you're going to win or you're going to lose. Sometimes you'll get a verdict that's like somewhere in between, right? Or sometimes we'll settle a case that's like a little of an in-betweener. But you really have to have that competitive edge if you're going to do personal injury law.
Yeah.
And especially the way the business model runs on the plaintiff side, because it's contingency fee and because you are fronting all of those case costs, you better be competitive if you're going to vigorously act on your client's best behalf, and you're gonna work up the case as good as you can for them, because there are many situations. That case that we just settled a couple months ago, where you're a couple $100,000 in on a couple of these cases, and you're like, man, if we don't win this trial, that might
we're in trouble.
That might hurt the firm a little
Elise
bit.
and Ashley are going to maybe get together and find a couple other guys to raise their children with.
Yeah, we'll be selling one of our homes to fund the following case. But so I just think that competitiveness, you need to have a little bit of that if you're going to be successful in our field. But I will say, the one thing that I do like that's different on the plaintiff side than the defense side is, as much as we, compete with defense attorneys and insurance companies, plaintiffs' attorneys seem to work really well together. There's this sharing of information, on the CASD listserv and just like in our community, and some of the guys up in LA too, who are well respected. I feel like the best and the brightest in our field are the people who are the most generous with their time. They're the most willing to help out. If we have a success story, we try to share that with other plaintiffs' attorneys, because, what is it? All ships rise with the rising tide.
Yeah, rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah,
exactly.
No doubt.
And that's how it is on our side. Whereas on the defense side, it seems like they work in these silos where they're always competing with each other for business, and then no one's ever really sharing trial secrets and things like that, because if it's working well, they want to keep it at their firm to get more business.
I know of, and the firm shall not be named, but I sat down with a named partner of a very, very large, LA, now global firm, and they specifically have a file vault, that they will not let outside of their purview, and they won't let associates take those files and run with them, and it makes a lot of sense, I think, from their business model perspective, because if they're representing a corporate client, there's a risk that that person will steal their client. But I think you're totally right. I think that that's another thing that I love about what we do, is that there is a collegiality and a camaraderie, and I think what precipitated that was attorneys that are generations ahead of us realizing that if we banded together as a team, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? It's like you get, a large settlement or a large verdict, sharing that strategy that you pursued in that case is going to help everyone else in the community
Yep.
and ultimately going to help our clients, which are the consumer, right? So, yeah, I think that's a great point.
It's one of the things that like my dad would always talk about because he worked at this big firm in Jersey, right? And he talked about just the importance of working at a big firm where you're learning from the people that have been around the longest, and you can go to them as mentors for you to teach you what you need to know, and then you'll know and you'll have a protege eventually and do that whole thing. And I don't know if it's just a Southern California thing or if it's maybe just, since we've started our own business and now we kind of have to learn from other people out of necessity. But practicing here in San Diego, it's like you just, I have felt a totally different vibe than I did in New Jersey. I don't know if I were to start my own firm in New Jersey tomorrow, if I would have that same type of camaraderie and mentorship from just random strangers. Whereas here, it just seems a little bit different. I don't know if it's California
Even in the same
thing.
practice area, huh?
Yeah, I don't know, but it
Interesting.
I had only worked at bigger firms in New Jersey, so I never really needed to go outside
Right.
of that firm that I was in to find out information, to find out things. But in California, just the way that it is set up here, it seems very unique to me. Different than New York and different than New Jersey. You have a lot of solo practitioners or smaller boutique firms who use each other for not just information and like, hey, share your trial secrets, but does anyone have an exemplar of a motion because I've got to write one in this case? And I think it breeds this culture of people who are able to start their own practices and succeed on their own that I just didn't feel on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly appreciate that. I'm coming from such a different perspective, right? I'm like, federal government issued my paycheck,
Yeah,
for
for
the last
sure.
11 years. So I think, my only data points are my law school classmates that, and I will say, like, I can count on one hand the law school classmates of mine that have started their own practice. And
Oh, really?
yeah, and that's, maybe because I'm not that great staying in touch with everyone, but, I also have a pretty good finger, I think, on the pulse of what folks are doing, and maybe it's the kind of law school I went to. I don't know. I don't know what exactly caused it, or is the reason for so few entrepreneurial, I guess, classmates of mine. But it is, it was another thing that attracted me to joining up with you, and it's that you've got kind of the machine running. You've got the processes in place, and there's sure, of course, ways we're going to always improve, and we're always going to be striving for improvement, but it's a scary, challenging endeavor for sure.
Well, you have that entrepreneurial mind, right?
Hmm.
Because other than playing professional basketball in Germany, you've got one of the more eclectic backgrounds of any attorney that we've had on the show, right? So you are a film producer. You've done that in the past. You've been to film school. You
Yeah.
are a an author. You've published a fiction, a legal thriller that I can attest to that I've read myself, and it gives John Grisham a run for his money. So like, where does all of that, I'm going to call it entrepreneurial mindset, or it's really like you're like a renaissance man with a lot of this stuff. So like, where does all that stem from?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, just to backpedal a little bit, yeah. So I wrote the book when I left the Navy the first
Give us the
time.
name.
So the
Give
book is
us
called
the
More Than One Truth, and it's kind of like an homage to like where I grew up because I just have a really strong affinity for Chico and growing up there, and it's just such a different place and just a different time from where I am now in my life, and I think that had I really fully appreciated the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into writing a book, I would have put more of myself into it. I would have like tried to write something more literary, maybe.
There's still time.
And there's still time, you know. Maybe when I'm retired, you know, maybe when you and I finally hang them up for good. But I think, you know, I sought out to write like a very easy read airplane fiction book, and I think I accomplished that. So I'm very proud of it. I just think that, you know, it was a lot of work for kind of a little bit of a fluff, you know, of a read. It's not.
Oh man, I don't see it like that at all. I think you certainly accomplished the, you know, airplane novel or whatever you want to call it. Like I read this thing in a week on vacation when Ashley and I went to Portugal a couple years ago.
Well, that's good to hear. That was the goal. Quick read.
It was awesome, right? Like I'm just sitting on a beach and I'm like, man, I can't believe that Matt wrote this book.
Yeah.
And I do think, well, I guess you're kind of like loosely based on the main character, right?
Yeah.
Like,
So, you know, like a lot of authors, I think I drew on my upbringing. I drew a little bit on my personality. You know, I tried to draw as much as I could from stuff that I knew. But yeah, it's if you read the book, which I think it's, you know, maybe still on Amazon, I'm not sure. It's you'll realize that it's definitely not an autobiography at all.
Well, yeah, it's not an autobiography,
but you know, so I guess circling back to kind of what we were talking about with the book. So and just kind of like what drove that entrepreneurial spirit, you know, or why I've done so many weird things or unique, interesting things is I think it's a couple of things. You know, I think I was the youngest child, so I did whatever I wanted.
Same.
And I think my dad, you know, who was a huge influence on my life, I only came to realize how influential he was. I think when I was an adult, like in really the more recent years, starting a family, all that stuff.
How so?
But he always kind of was trying to steer me away from basketball, like, and not that he wasn't supportive. He was very supportive, but it was like you should, you know, focus on school, you should focus on academics,
Right.
And I just always had that streak to be like, no, I'm just not gonna I'm not gonna listen to you. I'm not gonna listen to that advice, which was great advice, and I should have followed it. But I think that has driven a lot of the, you know, choices that I've made. Just like, oh, you can't do that. You can't play professional basketball. There's no way. You're not athletic enough, or, you know, you went to a small school. And I'm like, okay, thanks for that opinion, but I'm gonna try anyway. You know, like, oh, no one can, you know, be a novelist, or no one can write a book. Like, okay, like, thanks for that opinion. I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that kind of informs, you know, a lot of attorneys in the space that we're in, right? It's like someone has to stand up to insurance companies at the end of the day and representing their clients. And I think it's the sort of counterculture is not the right word, but the iconoclast, you know, kind of the people that are willing to challenge the status quo are like, no, my client actually does have, you know, these damages, and it's drastically impacting his or her life. And like the offer that the insurance company is giving is insulting. And like, no, we're gonna like, thanks for your opinion, but like, no, we're taking this to trial, you know?
100%.
So I think, you know, you asked where that kind of came from. I think it just seems like it's innate in a lot of people from my perspective, but maybe that's just because it's innate in me.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard someone draw a connection to the mentality of like, don't take no as an answer to like what we do in the law. Because Jordan will tell me all the time, like I'm a contrarian, right? Like if someone just like says we're ordering pizza, I want hamburgers, whatever, right? Or like it's more when someone tells you have to eat pizza. You want hamburgers.
Yeah, you're like, no.
I tell Ashley all the time, I'm like, you ever want to manipulate me? Just tell me I can't do something, you know? And I will be like, screw that. Of course I can go do
or
something.
just tell me the opposite of the thing you want me to do.
100%.
And I'll find my way to
and
like where
make
you
it so that I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But that's really true, right? For insurance companies, for the most part, successful trial attorneys that I've had on the show, they know that you're never you're never going to get full value out of a settlement for the most part, right? Like 95% of the time, you're not getting full value from a settlement, especially pre-litigation from an insurance company. Now there's trade-offs, right? There's the time trade-off. If you don't want to wait 2 years, if you don't want to litigate and put yourself through a deposition or discovery and all the shit that goes, with litigation.
Totally.
There's that trade-off, and you say, okay, I'll give up a few $1,000 in a lot of cases in order to get that payoff now and not have to go through that struggle.
And the risk analysis, right? It's
Absolutely.
like then you're I know you were just about to say that, but then there's like, hey, a random jury of 12 people is, we can give you some data points and we can steer you in the right direction and we can tell you what we think and we can tell you our level of confidence, but that's just the way our system is, right? You put the case before those people and they decide. So
I remember the conversation that I had with defense counsel right before we settled that recent brain injury case that we got 7 figures on. We're on the doorstep of trial, and we are just gung-ho on trying the case. And I remember not only the defense attorneys, but you have insurance reps who are, at your trials a lot of the time, and expert witnesses, even like my own expert witnesses. They were like, what are you guys, like, how come you're not settling this case? Like, how come you're going to trial? And like, my answer is always like, that's how we get full value of a case, right? Like, you shouldn't be scared of a trial. My experts weren't telling me this because we had a weak case. They just like don't see trials that often because most attorneys will settle beforehand.
And they see money on the table, right?
Oh yeah.
So your experts are, the experts are like, hey, this is money that you can take for the client. Why not just call it a day? And
it wasn't until we were literally in motions in limine, judge is about to rule on all of this stuff, that the defense attorneys finally give my client what she had been asking for 2 years. And so it's like, if you go into cases with that mentality of just, okay, you're not going to give us full value, we'll just try it. That is really how I think you get the best results. And, Brian Breiter, who I've had on the podcast, he says the same thing, right? And he kind of comes up with this. I've heard him recently on another podcast talking about how he'll just sort of say in the beginning of the year, like, I want to try 3 cases this year or 5 cases this year. And let's pick them out. Let's talk to the clients who make sure they want to go. But let's see the cases that we think will have the most upside if we invest in and we go and we try it. And then it's like, it doesn't matter what the insurance company says. There kind of is no number, because let's just go see what these 12 jurors are going to say about it, rather than this insurance company who's actually going to be paying out this money and is never going to give you the full value for your case.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you have, like 8 clients where you think you could pursue that strategy, and and then you kind of whittle that down, and 3 of them agree with you and like your strategy, and obviously the client always dictates the outcome, and then you just go with those 3.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, we're in that process with a couple clients right now.
What our meeting's about tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, you started to talk to us a little bit about your dad and how he influenced your life. I think that we come from kind of a similar background in the sense that both of our fathers are attorneys, and your dad still practices as a judge up in Chico. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, how did your dad really, shape your life in becoming an attorney? And what did he first say to you when you told him that you were finally quitting basketball and going to be attending law school?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because the very short, easy answer is like, how did he influence me in going to law school? Not at all.
He told you couldn't do it.
Yeah, he told me you can't do it. I think that, I just viewed law school. I take that back. My dad is a really, really well-read. He just craves learning. He's a constant life learner. He is always reading the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Economist, like literally any publication. I heard Jamie Dimon actually recently, the JP Morgan CEO, he was talking about like his morning routine and how he reads like every paper front to back, and then he ends with like the Financial Times. Like I was like, this is like listening to my dad. That's how I felt. And so I think without realizing it at the time, I think I subconsciously really admired that quality of his. And so I didn't really go to law school to become a lawyer. I was not one of those people that wanted to go to law school since the time I was 5 years old, and get up and, make arguments and be in an argumentative field, which is obviously the nature of what we do. But I think when I was finishing my professional basketball career, I just looked at the landscape of options available to me, and I realized that possibly, and I stand by this, the best education that you can get about the world and the way our world works, whether it's the civics, aspect of it, or the judicial or administrative aspect of it, was going to law school. And so that's really why I went to law school. And it wasn't really, like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't really until later in my life that I realized how much influence my dad had on me. So, that precipitated me going to law school. And then I think, becoming a Navy JAG, he has never been more proud in his life. Obviously it's kind of a touching, interesting scenario, having a cousin who was a Navy SEAL. And I think I had like exams or something, so I couldn't make it to Derek's memorial, but my dad was there, of course. And so he was extremely proud when I became a Navy JAG officer. But, I think he is a fantastic judge, and he's a much better judge than he was an attorney. He wasn't a bad attorney, but he had his own practice in Chico, and it's just tough, I think, being a country, attorney. There's just not as many cases. There's not as much opportunity. And I think that was tough. So it did not make the practice of law very attractive to me growing up, watching him go through that. But now, obviously I've practiced now for 11 years in the Navy, and I'm circling back to it. And I think, combining his like diligence and his attention to detail and his focus and lifelong learning with that sort of entrepreneurial streak is why we're going to crush it.
Yeah, Judge Benson's been a huge help to me as well in my practice, in our practice. I mean, when you and I had worked together a couple of years ago, we would often call him. He's one of the most available judges to speak to as well. I love Chico for that reason, because you call him and he's just like, all right, just got off the bench. Like, what's going on, right?
Yeah,
he's just
totally.
like willing to help out with anything and everything. And man, I would say being a judge has to be one of the toughest freaking jobs out there in the law, though, right? Like, you're doing everything on every type of case. And I mean, is he specific to civil?
I don't know.
Or like
I don't agree at all.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
my God, man. The stuff that the judges they just have to know. There's such a wealth of knowledge that I think comes with it.
Yeah.
That, like, and you have to be, I think, an accomplished trial attorney to have any efficiency at being a good judge.
Well, yeah, right. I think that kind of hits it on the head, right? Is that, a lot of it's temperament, but so much of it is experience.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
there's young judges. There are guys in their 40s
so
that
in that scenario, that's tough. That's got to be a tough job.
I think it's crazy.
Because that's drinking from a fire hose, I would imagine.
I think so. I mean, you hear like those who can't teach, and I don't agree with that saying at all. But like, you have some professors sometimes that I just remember asking my torts professor something when I first started out law school about like expert witnesses or whatever. And then I quickly realized like he had never like tried a case with expert witnesses before. I was just like, this is so fucking weird that I'm learning this through this guy who's supposed to be teaching me this, and he didn't have that practical experience. Whereas judges, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have practical experience, you don't last long on the bench. There was a
Yeah.
judge that I will not name, but just ended up leaving, and they had a very short tenure. And I think it's because they quickly realized, like,
I don't know what I'm doing.
I don't know what I'm doing, or this
Yeah.
is more than I signed up for. You
Yeah.
know, it's longish hours with a lot of crap that you have to know, right? They only work till 4 o'clock, but then they read all the papers and stuff
For sure.
afterwards.
I
It's
mean,
just-
I think that's you nailed it when you said, you know, Butte County is a good place to be a judge, probably, because it depends on your jurisdiction.
Butte County.
Depends on your caseload, you know,
Yeah.
and the types of cases, and
How many tractor cases can we hear
Oh my
in 1 month?
there's awesome people up there. But yeah, it's a lot of almond farmers and rice farmers. And,
The idea that I have in my head of like where you grew up, I know it's not what it actually looks
well,
like.
I thought
right?
I grew up in the big city, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, Chico is like the largest city in all of California north of Sacramento, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
anything north of Sacramento, I'm like, this is like New York City.
Right.
Everyone drives to Chico to come hang out, you know? Like, I mean,
Right.
if you're in Red Bluff or, you know, Eureka or any of these cities, like you're going to the Chico Mall, that's like the place to be. So I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then of course, you know, I like actually lived in a proper city, and
Yeah. Then you see New York City. And
I'm
you're
like, oh,
wait a minute.
yeah. Guess Chico's a little small.
That's funny, man. All
But
right.
I just have to say that I love Chico so much. When Elise and I go back there, we're gonna go back, I think, for Halloween, you know, kind of our annual Halloween, you know, October trip, and it's just like, it's just the greatest place. It's the greatest people, the greatest place. It's you know, just a slower pace of life. Not that. I'm glad I'm just like, you know, editorializing on how much I love Chico. The podcast guests are like, you know, hit stop right now. But
I feel the exact same way about Jersey. It's like the greatest place that I will never live again.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, I loved growing up in Jersey.
do you love going back?
I love going back because now I go back in the summertime and I go
Right.
down to my parents' place down the shore, you know, where
Yeah.
I learned I grew up surfing. And
I
just,
didn't
like,
realize the Jersey Shore was so expensive, you know? Like, it's just,
Why?
isn't it expensive?
I don't know. Where are you
I thought
talking about?
well, I just think of Jersey Shore. I think of the MTV show, right?
know.
And they
That's
did
what-
not seem like the
that's-
most
that's
wealthy,
what everyone thinks,
sophisticated
yeah.
crew, right?
I had to explain myself to like every person that I met in Europe because when I would say I'm from Jersey, they were all like, "Oh, the
Jersey
Shore."
Shore.
It's like, this blows.
It was the Jersey Shore.
Yeah,
You love it.
that's how they would say
Like,
it.
no.
Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, there's like expensive real estate and stuff in different
That's
parts
what
of
I
Jersey.
thought. That's
for
what I was
sure.
referring to. I didn't realize
It's
that
not
the real
like-
estate was so expensive.
You know, I mean,
But there's pockets that aren't, right?
definitely. It's not like coastal California where you literally can't find
my
a place
gosh.
for less than
California
seven
housing.
figures.
Good grief.
But you know, there are definitely towns.
Should we take a
closer-
right turn and do California housing for a half hour?
Commercial real estate. You want to talk about that for a little bit? Let's go.
Yeah, we
dude.
can get into
Let's
that
go.
for sure.
Yeah, Jersey. Ashley and I both always say that like we loved because she grew up going down the Jersey Shore too.
Yeah.
and like we loved growing up there, and I have made it very clear to her that I will never live there again. But
Yeah. Oh, she's kind of put the bug in your ear, like maybe.
nah, just when
no?
we started having kids, you know, like
Come on, man, we got this partnership going like right now. Like, you can't leave me now.
No, she was like when we first started having kids, and then the idea of having multiple kids. She, I think, got a little nervous that we have no family out here.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
You guys have Elise's family right here in San
Totally.
Diego. I know your family's up in Chico, but like they can zip down here pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Our family both on the East Coast, other than my now living mother-in-law.
Oh,
who we
man, Deb is the
thankfully
best.
have
Shout out
here.
to Deb.
Shout out to Deb.
Deb.
Yeah, Deb, text me during this part of the podcast if you're listening.
Yeah.
All right, Maddie, I want to get to some important stuff here because we touched on, you know, your ability with procedure and just your organization and some of the systems that you have learned, I think, through the Navy, but it just kind of sounds like you're that type of person. I
Yeah.
imagine I've heard you tell me stories in the past about like what you would eat while training for basketball and just like
Well, even
you're
just
super
how I
dialed in.
studied for the LSAT. I was
Oh
playing
yeah.
professional basketball in Germany, and I was told, and you do those LSAT courses, and I think I'd maybe taken one of them, but you're told like, oh, this test is so important because then they weight it with your GPA, and then they can kind of like tell if you went to a good school or not. So I like became a complete psychopath, and while I was playing professional basketball, I spent like 5 or 6 hours in the library every day, like studying for the LSAT, and that's how I ended up at UCLA. A little bit out over my skis, probably, but
Yeah, but
got into a good school.
that mentality and drive will only get you so far, right? You actually like you need to back it up too with the ability, and you're one of those rare people that has both. So like, how are you planning on bringing some of those processes that you've learned either through your experience with basketball or the Navy into Goldfaden Benson and kind of shaping the future of our law firm together?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating time. Law students, other attorneys that practice in our area are going to all know this and acknowledge it because everything is AI. Every website is now .ai. And I think that the tools are fine. And what I mean by that is there's all these softwares, right? There are all these software programs that people have used or people will tout, and they're only they're only as effective as you make them. They're only as effective as you use them. They're all just a tool. So I think that the stuff that we're building, both from a client management system, a marketing system, and a case management system, not just a client relationship management system, is, I don't want to be too grandiose with how much I'm, touting it, but I think it's going to 10x our practice, and not necessarily in volume, but just in terms of efficiency, right?
Yep.
And the one thing I do agree with all the people that tout these, different software programs or platforms that are out, or AI technology, is I do think that it allows a greater ability for you to interface with the clients, which is such an important, critical part of the job. I mean, they're dictating the outcome. Oh, you need to know how they're doing, how their pain is, are they managing? I think, I know you agree, and that's such a big part of our job and a big part of our role. Yes, we're their advocates and their advisors through the legal process, but I think it's a lot more than that, right? I mean, you sign up a client, you develop a level of care and trust with that person, such that you want to make sure that they're doing okay throughout the process, and not just informed and dictating the outcome and telling us, listening to our advice and then making decisions based off that advice. So, I know I'm kind of painting a broad brush and I'm kind of being a little bit vague, but, I think for Goldfaden Benson, for us specifically, without getting into too much detail, we can take these off-the-shelf software platforms that aren't specific to the legal practice, and you can customize them on your own, and not just have it be a cost savings, have it be an efficiency multiplier.
Right.
As opposed to just being like, oh yeah, let's just like grab this like CRM software, off the shelf, that's fine too. I'm not,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I mean, there are softwares out there right now that I think for 95% of people who want to get into the practice of law, who are already practicing law, some people who have been around the block for a couple more years than you and I have, who are probably like a few steps closer to retirement, like these things might make your life a little bit easier, right? And AI is going to be great for that. What attracted me to you the most as a partner is your ability to learn, your ability to take these things like you were saying. They exist. There are AI tools that exist that if you are able to customize them to your own practice in a way that like these softwares that already exist don't do, but you're able to use them in your own practice, you can free yourself up to do all of the important shit that goes into practicing law,
Exactly.
right? Like
all of the most value add, right? The highest value add tasks.
Yes. I mean, anyone who asks me what they're getting into when they're getting involved in a lawsuit, I tell them straight up what's involved, right? I'm like, look, we're going to file your lawsuit and you're going to have to sit through a deposition. It sucks. In California, they can make you sit there for up to 7 hours of actual questioning and run time. And some people do it in personal injury cases. If it's an employment law case, there is no time limit. You can literally go for days and days and days, right? And so there are certain things like sitting through a deposition that suck. Things like written discovery. That sucks. You have to answer hundreds and hundreds of questions that are asked of you by the defense. It's their right to ask you these questions, but you have to sit there, oftentimes at first by yourself, then with your attorney, and just answer all of these questions. And it's not just stuff that relates to your case. It's like, hey, give me every address that you've lived in for the last 5 years, and just things that are just so monotonous that my point is that if you're able to free yourself up of some of these tasks that are just menial and monotonous, and you're able to just get that off of your plate, you can then focus on the important parts of your case, like what you're talking about, right?
Like a dispositive motion, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, like
doing legal work, or actually spending more time with your clients, or actually spending more time on the phone with defense attorneys and adjusters, arguing your client's position in your client's case, or getting yourself prepped for trial. I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in trials that before the trial actually takes place and you just want to get prepped, you want to write your opening statement and your closing arguments and your crosses and everything. You can't do it because you're being bogged down with all of these motions and limine that you have to come up with, and just the work behind the scenes that if you were able to automate and use AI to your advantage, to your own practice's advantage, you can really focus on the important parts of your case. And I think that's what you bring to the table, and I think it's what our vision is for Goldfaden Benson Law, right? It's this idea that we're going to use AI to our advantage so that we can actually focus on the important parts of the case.
100%.
Yeah, and the other thing is I listen to some legal podcasts, right? As I'm sure you do. I send you these videos on Instagram and stuff all the time, and like there are so many people out there right now talking about AI, because AI is that trigger word, right? You'll see commercials. There's that, like, I was watching a Matthew McConaughey commercial the other day on like AI and Salesforce, and I'm just like, man, everything there, AI is that trigger word. And I just think that it's those few people that are going to come out of these next 5 years of our practice that you're really going to see as the AI tech guys. And I just think that that's what our law firm is going to be. I think you're going to start seeing it over the next couple of months and then the next couple of years. But all of those pretenders who are just talking about AI, like when you start to question them about how they're actually using it in their practice, you'll find that there's not a lot of weight behind those punches that they're throwing.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And so can you talk to us a little bit about...
Yeah, they've got one of the legacy software platforms.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's not bad. I'm not besmirching that at all.
That's what I'm saying 95% of the people are going to do, right? Like, whatever. Let's just use the companies that are out there. Like that Even Up Law that I was just sending you the other day. And I was like...
Clio, whatever.
Yeah, like, what do you think about this stuff? And I hear people talking about it. I've been, involved in some of the little testers that the companies will run, and you'll jump on with an hour with them, and they'll tell you what to do. And for people who have no idea what AI does, when they're introduced to a company like Even Up, they're like, oh my God, it can write a demand for me. This is going to save me hours of work. That's how 95% of the people are going to use this stuff,
Totally.
right? But when you are actually developing your own software, and you and I had been tinkering around with ChatGPT and these prompts that once you're connecting it with the other softwares that we are using,
totally,
to have it create like customized demand letters and everything for our practice that we're using.
I think the issue for the legacy software companies are that there's so much uncertainty in the space that if you hitch your wagon to one of these legal specific software platforms, you run the risk of like, all right, I mean, this is how they get you, right? You run the risk of having all your information on one of these platforms and then in 5 years being like, well, they're not the leader in the space. What the heck? So like, unfortunately, I'm not like a big enough nerd to like actually be coding this stuff on my own. But I do think, running our systems on Airtable and Make and, these customizable, non-legal focused platforms is going to allow us to take a step back and say, all right, here's what we have. Here's how we're using it. It's working, phenomenally well. But then if a software does emerge as like, oh my gosh, this is like blowing everybody out of the water, which I don't think it will, because I think what we're building and what we're customizing to our specific practice is going to be just as good, if not better, than anything that any of the legacy providers can produce. But if they do emerge, it's like, okay, we'll just head on over there, and that's fine. But that, they're being able to control client information, right? Keeping client information secure, confidentiality, like that stuff, being able to really tailor it on our own and make sure that, we are hitting all those wickets and providing the efficiency that kind of the legacy software providers are trying to get to is, why we're doing things the way we're doing them. And, I think it's why we're gonna this is a little bit of an infomercial, but we're gonna be able to provide exceptional value to our clients, above and beyond I think what else is out there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna take a page out of the Alex Hormozy school of thought and like give away some of our secrets here, like let's let our listeners in on some of the stuff that you and I have been working on over the last couple of months, right? Because you've mentioned Make, you've mentioned Airtable, like talk to the audience a little bit about, just give them a taste of like some of the stuff that you're building, some of the automations that you're running, and like what your vision is for using those automations at our firm.
Yeah, sure. So I think with respect to Make.com, it was formerly called Integromat, but it is basically a no-code automation platform. And the reason why we're using that specifically is because you can connect it with any app that you're using, whether it be Slack, ChatGPT, Airtable, Canva, literally name, anything that has a web URL, you can use a HTTP module if you want. And so starting with Make.com as the backbone of the platform, so to speak, or rather the automation platform, that's, I think, kind of one prong of how we're approaching things. Airtable as both a CRM, a content calendar for marketing, as well as a case management system, in my opinion, and I know this is where we're going, is far superior to what else is out there, because we get to customize it to exactly how we're operating. So, Airtable and other platforms are building automations and integrations into their systems, but there is no software out there other than Zapier. And even Zapier has a lot of limitations. There's no software out there like Make.com that allows the flexibility and the customizability that is sort of, like I said, the engine that drives what we're doing.
Yeah, and then the other reason that I guess this is all important is that no matter how far AI gets, there are still inputs that you need in every single case, every single lawsuit, right? Because like we talked about before, the facts of every case are different. The injuries of every case are different. So we're eventually going to get to a point where, and we're kind of there already, where you can upload medical records. You can have AI give you medical summaries. You can have those summaries interact with other things that you've built where, when it comes to the injury section of your demand, it'll write that for you. When it comes to different sections of your discovery responses, you can have those things ready to go and produced by AI, but the inputs themselves of how your accident actually occurred, all of that stuff still needs to be input.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're building right now for our firm on these platforms are the systems where once you input those things, the facts of your case, everything is saved in this one platform where it then can communicate with all of the AI tools that we're
Yes.
using in our practice so that these things can get done automatically. These things that take hours and hours or weeks, a lot of the time, you have 30 days to respond to discovery for a reason. So
Totally.
like these things that take a really long amount of time, we're now able to do at the press of a button. And I think that if your firm is using some of these softwares already, what you're talking about is true, right? There are dangers involved, not just with confidentiality, but like all of your client information being on one system. They can hike those prices up if your firm grows. They can shut down if their competitors are doing a better job than them, and then you have to kind of move everything over. Anyone who has tried a case management software and then had to, go in some sort of mass exodus to try something else, and I've done it myself at these firms, it's a pain in the ass. And so if you just are able to give yourself the knowledge of how to use some of these tools like you're doing, you won't run into those problems because the tools are out there right now. And AI, even though it's been out for over a year now, where it's kind of been in the mainstream, we're still at the starting line.
Totally.
And there's no, that's the other reason I laugh when I hear attorneys talk about like just how they're the experts in it and how like they're giving these talks on these different platforms that I'm watching and listening to and I'm a member of, and I'm like, man, how are you the expert, right?
Yeah.
I've been using ChatGPT for as long as you have. Like,
Yeah,
what?
nobody's the expert.
There's
Nobody's an expert.
Yeah, and that's the
The
point.
people
It's
at
like,
ChatGPT aren't experts.
Yeah.
It's like we're building the plane as we're flying it here.
absolutely. Like you've been doing this stuff for months now.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it like one of those things where the more you get involved, the more automations you're building, the more you're realizing like, holy shit, there's like a lot more that we can be doing with this thing.
Oh yeah.
It's like one of those things that the more you learn about it, the more you realize that you don't know everything that there is to know about it. And so when I hear people talk like that, I'm like, okay, that's cool that you're interested in it, but like you're not an expert in it, and we're all kind of starting at the same point. So
Totally.
as long as you're focused on it and you're making it a big point of your practice, then like you can be that expert in it, but it's going to take some time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have nothing to add from that because I totally agree. I totally agree.
All right, Maddie, let's turn to some of the other like fun stuff that we do, or some of the stuff that you had that you wanted to kind of throw back at me at this point in time. Feel free to jump in when you want, but we always kind of turn towards the end of our podcast and we talk a little bit about some of the stuff you're excited about, some of the stuff that you are wanting to kind of give students advice on, and any like books or...
Well, let me stop you right there and say the thing I'm excited about. The thing I'm excited about is to find out the gender of your next baby.
Yeah, man, I'm excited.
You guys having
too.
a boy or a girl, man? What do you
we'll
think?
find out in a couple months. You know,
Yeah.
Ash and I waited when we found out we were pregnant the first time. We both wanted to wait, and that was just one of those weird things where I was like, oh, there's not many people that I've met who told me that they want to wait to find out the sex of the baby. This second one, I was like, that was cool. We waited the first time. I was like, Ashley, whatever you want to do this next time around, like, you let me know. And she seems pretty intent on waiting again.
She's amazing. I don't know how she does it.
No, man.
So I mean, I guess for the audience, but I've got two boys, and Troy, our littlest guy. He's about 3.5 months. He's going to be 4 months on the 7th. And man, he is awesome. And I love my guys. They're great kids, but he's a tough baby. He's a tough baby.
He's going to be watching this one day, man.
I know. I mean, look, Troy, you have not made it easy on mom.
First couple months.
Let's put it that way. Yeah.
How about, well, you're also coming off a night of tough sleep.
Yeah.
That you said.
Yeah, it was a little bit rough. He puked on me twice last night.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
and I'll throw it out to both of our wives, man, because it's true. It's like one of the other things that attracts me to you as a partner is like how you are with your family, and I just I've been playing around with this idea of partnership for a couple of years now, right? And like dipping my toe in different waters. We've had guests on the podcast where I'm always like, this person can bring something to the table that this person doesn't have. But really, like, this is the first time that it's ever been like, yeah, we need to make this move. We need to make it now. And we both know that it's going to work because not just of our friendship and the history that we've had together, but like our mentality on life, And I think Elise kind of said it the best when we left some event that we were all at a little while ago, and she was like, "It's really cool that it was after Father's Day." She was like, "It's really cool that we have this group of friends that all of these dads really care about being dads and are family focused." And I thought about that and I was like, yeah, that's true. It's kind of unique, man. Like I know like both of our, we come from good families where we had parents who cared a lot about us and I think that translated well to how we are as parents and husbands and everything, but I can't say the same thing for all of my friends from home or all of my friends from college. I don't know that everyone thinks of their marriage and fatherhood the way that our group of friends does here, and especially you and I think that we kind of just like look at fatherhood in a very similar light.
I totally agree. And I think that, I was trying not to stroke your ego too much at the beginning of the podcast, but, I think in building a firm culture, I completely agree. I mean, that translates how we view our relationship with our families translates to like what the culture of our firm is going to be. And that already is part of our firm culture. And it trickles all the way down to how we treat our clients. It's like, we are family first, we are doing this for our family and we are at the service of our clients, and that there is a corollary there. There's a connective tissue. There's a thread. And, one of the main reasons why I was so excited to partner up with you was just how you live your life. And it seems silly to say it this way, but it's like the sense of camaraderie and community that you foster among your friends is, the type of person I want to be and the type of professional workplace that I want to be in. I feel like that was like, and scene.
Hell yeah, dude. No, I feel the same way. I mean, when I listen to our paralegal, Christina, talk to clients about us, like when I hear her on the phone, like kind of pitching a client, hey, this is why you should come to this law firm, or this is why you should have these attorneys represent you. She doesn't know I'm always listening, but sometimes I'll like peek my head into her office or whatever. That's the thing she talks about, right? She talks about how, I've heard her say that Michael is a dedicated father and a caring boss. And it's like, those are the types of things that I care about the most. Those are the things that I think that if you're going to leave a legacy, like that's how you want to be remembered, right? Like when I used to go into my dad's office and talk to his paralegal or his secretary or just his partners and people that worked with him, like that was his legacy. That's what he left behind. And I've always thought that, like, why would you put yourself in an environment where you're going to spend a majority of your life?
Mm-hmm.
You should surround yourself with people that you want to work with, people who are like-minded, people who put their own families first in front of the business and in front of everything else, because like that's the most important thing,
100%.
And I think that it does translate to our business, because when I'm talking to an insurance rep, the one thing that I always try to do is put myself in the shoes of one of our clients. And I try to get this rep to see the same thing, right? I'm like, hey, I get it. You have a job and you have a limit on how much you can give this client, but like, let me tell you their story and what they're going through,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'll quickly find out if this is just going to be a losing argument and a dead end. But every once in a while, you get someone on the phone who is empathetic. And when you can tell your client's case like that, that's the way that I have always found I have been the most successful in this field. And I just think that like you can't really have that type of empathy and that compassion for your clients unless you can see yourself in their shoes, which is exactly what I think we both bring to the table.
100% agree.
Great feedback, dude.
Yeah.
Really great stuff.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more, man. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. When Elise was sitting us down and kind of going through that exercise of like, hey, these are the qualities. She actually had us write down qualities about ourselves. What do you think are the qualities about yourself that others see in you? And both of us just sat there like deer in the headlights.
Totally.
Right? We were like, shit, man, I can't.
Yeah, no
talk
one
about
likes
myself.
to talk about themselves, you know?
No.
No one wants to. And I think the point that I was trying to make in that meeting was like, not only does no one like to talk about themselves, I think my perception of myself is probably skewed or not accurate. And I would so much rather hear what other people think of me, you know, than.
Well, as soon as she turned it around and she's like, Mike, you described Matt on this little
Yeah, it
wheel
was, like,
of emotion.
easy. We, like,
I was like,
nailed
yeah,
it.
100%. And then Matt, you described Mike. I described you as like it was the hero was the
Archetype,
actual
right?
Yeah, it was the archetype. You know, but it was this person who I think it was a mix of like hero and tech guy because I forget the actual title of it. But it was like those are the qualities that you bring to the table, right? Like you do the right thing and you have this constant ability to learn or want to learn. And I love that you talked about that you got that from your dad. I never realized that like that's how you viewed your dad and probably is the reason that you are that way.
Yeah.
And then you had me pegged and I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
that's
yours
cool.
was your like number one, and at least like immediately co-signed. It was like compassion, and it was like the other one was like community or whatever word was on the wheel chart we were looking at that reflected community.
Yeah.
But it was a sense of camaraderie and community.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes that we couldn't identify those in ourselves, but then we had the other person
And it
identify.
It took 1 second.
Yeah, and it helped us form kind of like this basis of what's going to make up our law firm, right? Because you do bring that edge to the table where it's like you're always going to be on the cutting edge of technology and want to be implementing systems that like keep us at the forefront of all of the competition in our space, you know? And I'm always going to be that guy that like wants to spend an extra hour on the phone with a potential client when everyone else is like ready to freaking blow their brains out. But like, I'm like, hey, you know, just tell me a little bit more about your case and what you're going through. Because that's kind of a big one, you know, once you have that conversation, that sort of, that puts you in a position to really understand your clients a lot better and argue on their behalf. So I think that those two qualities are just something that we're going to be bringing to the table in our firm and setting us apart from everyone else in the space.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
You like that feedback?
I do. That's great. We got good sound bites.
It's a great rapport.
All right, Maddie. So tell us, you were excited to find out the gender of my baby. What are you excited about in your own life that you've got coming up?
I'm excited for baby Troy to like get a little older, maybe eat some salads. I'm sorry, I'm just laser focused.
Sleep through the night.
This kid, we had Banks. My firstborn was Banks.
Yeah.
We had Banks. Just military efficiency. Just regimented.
Yep.
And both of the boys are legends. Love them both. But man, Troy is just like, he's all over the map.
What do you think if Banks or Troy were to come up to you, 20 years from now and tell you that they want to go to law school? Would you be steering them in a different direction? Be proud of them? Would you encourage them? Like,
I would encourage them. I would encourage them.
Yeah.
What about you? What if Olive wanted to do that?
Fuck no. Dude.
No way.
I'm just kidding. I think more important to me than the field that my children go into is, I think, just the idea of starting your own business. I think that there's nothing in life that has been more rewarding to me than working for myself.
Yeah.
And I know that you feel the same way. It's why we're partners. And it's like, I just think that from a very early age, my dad would always describe me as being lazy because I fucking couldn't hold down a job, but it wasn't out of lack of like desire to do the work. It was because I can't work for other people. And it wasn't until I realized to stop listening to everyone who told me I couldn't do it, and I just started to actually take the steps to own my own business and to do this for myself, that I was like, this is the most rewarding thing for me.
And I heard you say on an earlier pod, and it's so true. It's like,
Our one listener. I love it.
It's so true. And you hear it a lot from a lot of different entrepreneurs, right? You hear it all the time, but it is so true. It's like, I couldn't work for anyone else. I wanted to work on my own. And, you like to characterize yourself as lazy, but I see how hard you work. And you said it on a recent pod. You're like, I've never worked so hard in my life. Now that you have your own business, it's like, I've never worked so hard in my life.
Oh, it's freaking wild. Yeah,
and
it's
you're
true.
working nonstop. We're both working nonstop. We're working 24/7.
Yeah, and for the first 5 years of the practice, it's out of necessity, right? It's like, I can't afford to employ anyone, so I'm going to have to lick every stamp and answer every call on the weekends and do all this shit, right? But then you certainly, you move past that and you get to a point where it's like, this is your baby, I've got Olive, I've got baby number 2 on the way, but like, this was baby number 1. And it's like, if you don't nurture that, then baby's going to go do meth with the homeless people on the freaking sidewalks, right? Your business is going to be in the shitter. And so, recently Ashley and I took that vacation to Italy, but like,
you were working the whole time you were there. I was
not the whole time, but I definitely figured out a system to make it work, right? Where I'm like, okay, we're on a 9-hour time delay. So if I do a little bit of work before or after dinner, that's great, right? Can do a little bit of work and I can like check in with the office. Christina will still be working. You'll be working. I can kind of check in and see what's going on. And then I'll wake up in the morning and everyone else will be sleeping, and I can just kind of like answer all the emails that came in and just like send all this crap out and go enjoy my day. And I think that, like, when you own your own business, it's cool because it's like, as long as you find a system to make it work, then you can go live that life and do whatever you want to do.
Totally.
But you definitely can't check out for a month. Right. And Sean kind of taught me about that too. Because he'd be the first person that, when I was an employee at other law firms and stuff, and I finally could steal away for 2 weeks, he would come with me. But he's owned his own business his whole life.
Totally.
Yeah. And so we'd be in Thailand or something. This guy would be on the computer from like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. every day. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And he's sending sunglasses out to these freaking people who are having bar mitzvahs in different states and shit. And
that's such an awesome business. I love that story.
Oh my God. Yeah. But he's been a huge influence on me in this business and in my life and everything like that. Like, his whole mentality and work ethic, I think, kind of translates to what we do here. But he also showed me that you can just start a business and figure it out and get going. So, full circle back, I guess it would be really cool if my kids told me one day that they wanted to start a business, whether they want to go to college or, become a professional or anything. All of that is secondary to me, to like, what do they want to do and follow their passion. And then if they want to start a business, that's really cool too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I kind of dodged the question because I think at this stage, I just want to open up the aperture for them and like let them. I mean, I'm basically just going to repeat, your answer, but it's. I just want them to do what they want to do. But the main part of that is like, I do want them to try to be the best at it, right? And I know that's what you hear a lot. It kind of is a cliche that's a little bit of an eye-rolling, cliche to hear again, but I think, there's a lot of value in putting forth that like dedication and discipline to be the best at whatever it is you're doing.
See,
why are you smiling?
I'm laughing because I know your work ethic and the militant way with which you approach things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, shit, man.
Laziness will not. Yeah, no.
Troy.
Laziness is not gonna fly.
They might have their work cut out for them. I don't know.
No.
But was your dad like that too? Like, did he kind of has that, right? Yeah.
He wakes up at 4 a.m. He's woken up at 4 a.m. for the last 45, 50 years, and goes to the gym. He's like in the office by like 7 or 7:30, and he just
It's like staring into a mirror for me.
Yeah, he was always that way, and I can't really say I was ever any different, to be honest. Like even when I was sleeping in and kind of enjoying the life of luxury or leisure, I should say, not luxury, I didn't do it long before I fell back in that routine where I was, I don't know, just a routine guy, I guess.
Yeah, it's also like how you're programmed early on, right? Because my dad also is like worked super, super hard, but then like vacation mode, he's fully on vacation.
Yeah.
And I don't really know where I fall in on that because it's like I definitely enjoy my downtime, but there's like a survival mode that like kicks in every once in a while where I'm just like, okay, like we're stuck on the side of a mountain and we've got our backpacks on and we just like need to get to a destination. It's like no excuses, just like fucking go and just like get there, right? And so I think that some of that stuff is like maybe taught to you and some of that stuff you're just kind of born with, but I don't know. Olive is like way too young to even be thinking about.
I know our kids are like
right
in diapers, you know. Banks is just like running around. He just wants to hit baseballs all day. So.
I think bringing Olive to Italy was a big first step, right? Because it's like, I don't know, an 11-hour flight for a kid. That's
gosh,
hey, you're gonna like kind of learn how to travel with mom and dad.
That's what we did with Banks. We threw him on the plane and went to Hawaii.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I keep telling Ashley, I want our family motto to be you carry your own water in this family because like we both love hiking and like I can just see us with our little like duckling kids following us and it's like everyone's got to carry their own water. You know,
I love that.
That'll be a cool one.
I'm gonna implement that into the Benson family.
Maybe it'll just be a law firm logo.
Yeah,
carry your own water in this law firm. All right, Maddie, give us some books, TV shows, movies. What's your medium? What kind of suggestions do you have for any of the listeners out there? What are you into?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm a big podcast guy because when you're changing diapers or trying to put a baby to sleep, you throw some AirPods in and it just makes it a little easier when you're doing the bouncing, the walking bounce. You know that well. I know you know that well. I really like the All In podcast. It's a bunch of billionaires sitting around kind of smelling their own farts a little bit.
Yeah.
But which that gets a little tiresome. It's a little annoying. But it's a really interesting, engaged, informed discussion about tech and the world and what's going on. And
who are the guys? Who are the four guys?
It's Chamath Palihapitiya, Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, and David Friedberg.
And like, what are their companies?
David Sachs, they're all in venture. They're all in venture capital. But Jason Calacanis he was an early investor in Uber. He was originally a journalist, and he had like Gizmodo and Engadget, and he was very successful in those. So everyone tries to like dunk on him by saying the Uber investment is like literally the only thing he's ever done, which is not true. He's a hustler, and he's an interesting guy. Chamath Palihapitiya, he ran Social Capital. I think he's the CEO of one of his companies now, but he was the early
Facebook.
Facebook.
Credit for saying that name like 3 times without stumbling once.
He was the early Facebook employee and was very high up at Facebook, and again, just a venture capital investor. And then David Friedberg was in the ag space, agriculture. He sold his company. He was a Google employee early on, very high up at Google. Shocker. They're like, were very lucky with where they landed. They worked very hard and they were very smart. But he was an early Google employee, and then he founded like an ag company, and he sold that ag company to Monsanto for, I don't know, Google it, probably billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. And then David Sachs was one of the PayPal guys. He was part of the PayPal mafia. So like he, was part of getting cashed out and having big bags of cash raining down on him when PayPal was sold to Yahoo, I think.
Yeah.
Damn. I don't know what happened to Yahoo. But anyways, that's the lineup, and it's a good podcast.
They're still running my fantasy football league is what happened to Yahoo.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they're big. Yeah, that's right. It's their one thing they still got going.
That's funny, man.
What about you? What do you got going on?
I'm still trying to get through this $100 million Leads book by Alex Hormozy.
Yeah.
So
That was great.
I can't quite recommend that to all the students yet, but I have recommended it to like 3 other people who have already finished it before I have.
You got to get an audiobook.
I know, man.
You can't sit down and read, man. You got Olive, you got babies.
I like that. I like that, just like trying to put the kid to bed or do whatever, throw a little audiobook in there.
Yeah.
I've never been a big audiobook guy.
I haven't either, and I've never been a big podcast guy until like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And that just so happens to coincide with when I was like trying to put babies to bed.
Yep.
Bouncing them around, you know?
Well, you listen to like a couple different podcasts. Like I'm just kind of a Rogan guy because I like him as the host.
Yeah.
And I'll tune in when I think it's a good guest, but it's sort of hit or miss with that. Audiobooks, I don't know. I've listened to a couple and I'm just like, I think though, you're right. It's kind of like the natural evolution for the time that I have now because I'm reading all day at work too. And so to like go home and try to like relax with a book,
100%.
It's tough sometimes.
Yeah. I make the joke to like friends that like I barely know how to read anymore, but that's because I'm reading 8 to 9 hours a day at our job.
Yeah.
It's like I don't read for pleasure because I'm just like my eyes barely work.
Well, especially for business books, audiobooks, I think work really well because
Yeah.
they are usually pretty tough to get through,
Yeah.
but the principles are all there. And I feel like when I listen to people have a discussion or something on a podcast, that's kind of where I get a majority of my info anyway. On like a 3-hour long Rogan podcast, I'm going to learn a boatload more than I'm going to learn from like an article that I read in the Times that morning or something like that.
Right,
So
right.
I like that suggestion a lot. I don't know. I also just finished this movie with Deb last night. We were watching Presumed Innocent, the old Harrison Ford movie that is now Apple TV show.
Oh, that's a great movie. That's a fantastic movie.
It was wild. I'm not going to give away any endings, but I was like, that's pretty fucking cool. I'm pretty good at like guessing endings and shit. I was like blown away with that one. And it's now an Apple TV show with Jake Gyllenhaal.
I know. Yeah. I saw that it was an Apple TV Plus show, but I haven't had any time.
Quan is telling me he's watched it, and he said it's like very different than the movie. So,
really? Well, the movie is an A+, 10 out of 10.
Yeah. And it holds up, even though it was made 30 years ago. And
it's one of the few movies that holds up. Yeah. Great lawyer movie. Great legal movie right there.
Yeah. I know. They kind of like spell out some of like the things like this is why we're doing this for our legal strategy. And I like laugh whenever I watch legal movies for that reason. But okay. I think what we'll do now is let me wrap up the show.
Wrap it up so my wife doesn't kill me.
Yeah. And then if there's any things that you want to just like get little sound bites for or whatever, we can do that.
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to sign off. You've been watching the Bar Bites podcast. I'm your host, Michael Goldfaden. Newly formed partnership of Goldfaden Benson. We've talked about it today. We've had our guest on, Matt Benson. He is the man behind the partnership and the newest member of our team. You've been listening to the podcast here. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.